welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, you're joining us as we plunge headfirst into a work that has, well, really echoed through philosophical thought for nearly 2 centuries.
That's right. We're talking about Soren Kierkegaard's Either-Or, published way back in 1843.
And think of this deep dive as your express ticket, really, to understanding its core arguments, its essence.
Exactly. Either-Or isn't just, a standard philosophy book. It's more like a battleground of ideas. It's foundational for existentialism.
Right.
And it throws 2 fundamentally different ways of life into stark contrast for you. The aesthetic and the ethical.
The aesthetic and the ethical.
Yeah, this whole battle is really at the heart of existentialism, How do you, as an individual with this kind of radical freedom, how do you choose to define yourself, your place in the world?
Okay, so our mission today is to navigate this text, which could be pretty fascinating, but also challenging, and pull out those essential arguments.
And the examples he uses, which are quite vivid.
Yeah, the examples, so you can quickly grasp their significance.
And what makes Either-Or particularly intriguing, I think, is its structure. It's not straightforward at all.
Right, you mentioned it's not just Kierkegaard talking directly to us.
No, not at all. He uses pseudonyms. Multiple fictional authors, even a fictional editor. Each presents a different viewpoint.
Okay, let's unpack this pseudonym thing a bit more. So, layers of authors.
Exactly. First, you have Victor Eremita. He's the pseudonymous editor who claims he just found these papers.
Okay, found them. Convenient.
Right. Then, in part 1, the voice is mostly someone called A. He's the champion of the aesthetic life.
A for aesthetic. Makes sense.
Pretty much. And within A's papers, there's another piece, The Seducer's Diary, attributed to a Johannes the Seducer.
Wow, okay, so layers within layers.
Definitely. Then part 2 shifts completely.
To the ethical side.
Yes, presented through 2 long letters from a character called Judge Wilhelm. He's writing to A, arguing for the ethical life.
The judge. Okay, an ethical authority figure.
Seems like it. And then there's a final part, the ultimatum. It's actually a sermon by a Jutland pastor, apparently forwarded by the judge.
A sermon. So religion enters the picture too.
It certainly hints at it, yeah.
So this whole setup, the pseudonyms.
Yeah.
Why do it this way? What's the point?
Well, it's crucial, really. It lets Kierkegaard explore these life views, put them head to head, without him explicitly saying, this one's right.
Ah, so he's not tipping his hand within the text itself.
Exactly. They're presented as possibilities, ways someone might choose to live. It leaves you, the reader, to grapple with the arguments yourself.
Right, so you get the raw arguments for each side. Okay, let's dive into part I then, the aesthetic life. We've got A laying it out. What's the core idea?
At its heart, the aesthetic life for A is all about the primacy of sensory experience, the pursuit of pleasure.
Okay, feeling things intensely.
Yes, cultivating those immediate sensory moments. And using imagination, really leaning into imagination to extract as much enjoyment as possible.
So art, music, theater, love, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Those are key areas where the aesthete seeks intense, fulfilling sensations.
So it's about being alive in the moment, savoring peak experiences.
Yes, but A also draws a distinction. It's important. There's a difference between, say, unreflective immersion in the senses.
Like just raw feeling.
Kind of, yeah. Think Mozart's Don Giovanni, pure sensuality, and then there's a more reflective aestheticism.
More intellectual.
Exactly. Focused on possibility, on an artful construction of life itself. Almost like making your life a work of art. Johannes the Seducer is the prime example there.
Okay, so we've got the immediate pleasure seeker and the more calculated pleasure architect.
That's a good way to put it. You have Don Giovanni, driven by immediate desire, almost reflexively. Then Johannes, meticulously planning every move, seeing his target, Cordelia, almost as a character in his own drama.
One feels hunger, the other designs the perfect meal and its consumption.
Precisely. It's that level of planning versus pure instinct.
Got it. But what's driving all this? What's the big fear for the aesthete?
That brings us to a really central concept for A, the tyranny of boredom. Kajedsomalite in Damus.
Boredom. Sounds mundane, but he makes it sound serious.
Oh, it's deadly serious for A. It's not just being a bit fed up. It's the ultimate existential threat. A void that sucks all the meaning out of life.
Why?
He even calls it the root of all evil, an emptiness that must be constantly actively fought against.
The root of all evil. That's intense. So how does the aesthete fight boredom?
By rejecting anything that leads to routine, predictability, sameness.
So commitments are out.
Definitely. Binding commitments like marriage, deep friendships, even demanding careers. A argues these are traps. They lead to repetition, limit your freedom to chase novelty, the next interesting thing.
A life of constant motion, then. Always seeking the next thrill to keep the void at bay.
That's the idea. But it's not presented as entirely successful or happy.
No, there's a downside.
Absolutely. Beneath all the talk of pleasure and avoiding boredom, A's writings have this deep undercurrent of melancholy, futility, even despair.
Really?
It's like A knows deep down that this constant chasing of fleeting moments is ultimately, well, unsatisfying. It doesn't lead to lasting fulfillment.
The chase itself confirms the emptiness.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
If you constantly need novelty to feel alive, what does that say about the moments themselves? There's an energy cost too, right? This constant performance, does it really conquer boredom or just mask a deeper unease?
It's like running faster and faster, but realizing you're not getting anywhere meaningful.
Wow.
Okay, you mentioned examples. Let's start with Don Giovanni. How is he the ultimate aesthete for A?
Well, in Mozart's opera, Don Giovanni is seen as the embodiment of pure, unadulterated sensual desire. He operates completely outside ethics.
Just immediate gratification.
Exactly. And A argues that music, specifically Mozart's music here, is the perfect medium to capture this. Pure sensuality, bypassing intellectual reflection. You just feel the desire.
The famous list, right?
Yeah.
The 1003 conquests in Spain alone.
Precisely. That really drives home the relentless pursuit, a constant succession of experiences, never settling, always moving on.
But you said there's a paradox.
Yes, A points out that this constant pursuit actually stops Don Giovanni from truly enjoying the present. He's always focused on the next conquest.
Never satisfied.
Right. A even contrasts him with a more reflective Don Juan figure who might savor the manipulation, or with Faust, whose desires are more complex.
Okay, so that's the immediate side. What about this rotation method? Sounds agricultural.
Huh. Yeah, crop rotation is another translation. It's A's theory of social prudence for battling boredom.
A theory for keeping things interesting.
Basically, the trick isn't just changing what you do, but how you experience it.
How so?
It's about cultivating arbitrariness, deliberately imposing limits on yourself to spark creativity, mastering the art of remembering and forgetting selectively.
Selectively.
Yeah, remember what brings pleasure, forget what doesn't. There's a great quote. Forgetting is the shears with which one clicks away what one cannot use.
Wow. So actively shaping your perception of reality.
Exactly. And key to this is avoiding lasting ties. Friendships, marriage, they're anchors that prevent the necessary freedom for rotation. You need detachment.
He even mentions delaying opening mail.
Yeah. Savor the anticipation, the possibility, rather than risking the potentially boring reality of the contents. It's all about maximizing the imaginative potential.
It's a very controlled, almost cynical way to live. And then Johannes the seducer. He takes it further.
He represents the extreme reflective end of the aesthetic spectrum. His diary details this meticulous, calculated seduction of Cordelia Wall.
But it's not about her.
Not really. For Johannes, the real kick isn't the consummation or even Cordelia herself. It's the process, the interesting game of seduction.
The manipulation, the psychology of it.
Precisely. He revels in the planning, the psychological games, creating possibilities, crafting this whole narrative around it. It's pure intellectual artistry for him.
So he values the story, the reflection, more than the actual experience.
Absolutely. It's all about aesthetic control, crafting life like art, even if it's ethically dubious. A huge contrast to Don Giovanni's impulsiveness.
A much darker, more manipulative version of the aesthetic life.
Definitely. And having both Don Giovanni and Johannes in part shows the range A sees in this stage. But again, that undercurrent of melancholy in A's own voice, it hints this whole approach might be built on sand.
Which sets the stage perfectly for part two, right? The alternative.
Exactly. A gives this compelling, but ultimately maybe self-defeating picture. And then Judge Wilhelm steps in with a completely different vision.
Okay, so part two. Judge Wilhelm, the ethical life. What's his fundamental counter-argument to A?
Judge Wilhelm's whole case hinges on the importance of choice. Real, definitive choice.
Not just floating possibilities like the aesthete.
Right. He argues that what gives life coherence, meaning moral weight, is the act of choosing. Specifically, choosing to choose and choosing oneself.
Choosing oneself. What does that mean exactly?
It means accepting your concrete reality, your talents, your limits, your situation, and taking responsibility for shaping your life according to ethical principles. Actively becoming who you are.
Okay.
There's that famous line, the aesthetically in a man is that by which he is immediately what he is. The ethical is that whereby he becomes what he becomes.
So the ethical person actively creates their identity through choices and commitments.
Precisely. Instead of just passively experiencing things like the ascete often does.
And what about things like commitment, duty, responsibility? He saw them as traps.
Judge Wilhelm sees them completely differently. For him, commitment to marriage, friends, a vocation, and accepting duties aren't limits on freedom. They are the very means by which freedom is realized.
How so?
Through these responsibilities, you move beyond just your own desires. You integrate into the community, you develop character. They give shape and substance to your freedom.
So opportunities for growth, not traps.
Exactly. And he talks about living in the universal, adhering to ethical principles that apply to everyone, not just your own subjective whims like the aesthete.
A move from pure individualism to recognizing broader obligations.
Yes. And Wilhelm argues this ethical commitment is the only way to really achieve genuine self-development, to integrate all the parts of yourself, desires, duties, past, future, into a coherent whole, something the fragmented aesthetic life can't do.
And he thinks you can still enjoy aesthetic pleasures this way.
He does. He argues the ethical life provides a more stable, meaningful framework for aesthetic experiences. It elevates them, makes them sustainable.
Grounding beauty and joy in something more substantial. Okay, how does he illustrate this? Marriage comes up a lot, you said.
Yes. Marriage is his prime example of ethical commitment. He defends its aesthetic validity.
Its aesthetic value. Interesting.
Yeah, he argues the stability, the deep intimacy, the shared history in a marriage offer far richer, more enduring aesthetic pleasures than the constant novelty seeking of the seducer.
So the repetition A fears is actually a source of depth for Wilhelm.
Exactly. It's an ethical task that yields consistent rewards. He directly contrasts his own fulfilled marriage with the manipulative fantasy world of Johannes the Seducer. For Wilhelm, marriage is about transforming that initial feeling into a lasting, responsible commitment.
Commitment as the fulfillment of romance, not its death. What about duty? How does he frame that?
He sees duty not as some external burden forced upon you, but as freely chosen self-determination.
Freely chosen.
Yes. By embracing your responsibilities, you actively shape your ethical self. You contribute to the community. His own life as a judge embodies this finding meaning through fulfilling obligations. It's a stark contrast to A's detachment.
Finding freedom within structure, not freedom from it. And back to choosing oneself.
For Wilhelm, this means accepting the totality of your existence, good and bad, and actively willing it as your own. Taking responsibility for becoming who you are meant to be.
Owning your life.
Exactly. He tackles A's dilemma, do it or don't do it, you'll regret it either way, by saying, the ethical choice, the commitment, that is the path to real freedom and a genuine self. Refusing to choose keeps you trapped, never really becoming anyone.
So the ethical life channels individuality through commitment to create a meaningful self.
Okay.
But then there's the ultimatum.
Right. Just when you think it's a clear choice between A and the judge, Kierkegaard, through the judge forwarding this sermon, throws in another perspective.
The religious one. What's the core message of this sermon?
The title, or central assertion, is stark. Against God, we are always in the wrong.
Always in the wrong. That sounds weak.
It's absolute. It argues that no matter how hard you strive, whether for aesthetic pleasure or ethical perfection by human standards, you inevitably fall short when measured against the divine.
So it critiques human self-sufficiency, both the ascete's self-absorption and the judge's ethical self-reliance.
Exactly. It implies that neither path, judged solely by human reason or desire, is ultimately sufficient.
And what's the implication of being always in the wrong?
The sermon suggests that recognizing this inherent limitation, this wrongness, is actually the foundation for true faith and trust in God.
How does that work?
By acknowledging our own imperfection, we can trust in God's perfection, even when things seem unjust or painful from our limited viewpoint. It shifts the ground from self-reliance to reliance on the divine. It points beyond universal ethics towards the individual's direct relationship with God.
So this sermon kind of recontextualizes the whole aesthetic versus ethical debate.
It really does. It suggests that maybe their limitations become clear only from this higher religious viewpoint. The ultimate etherer, it hints, might not be just between the aesthetic and the ethical, but between both of those human spheres and a religious sphere grounded in faith.
A sphere operating on different principles, perhaps.
Potentially, yes. Principles that might transcend purely ethical considerations. Kierkegaard explores this much more in his later works.
So the book stages this confrontation,
Mm,
but doesn't give a final answer within the main dialogue. A never replies to the judge.
correct. That tension hangs there, unresolved between them. You have the aesthetic life, pleasure, novelty, avoiding commitment, but with that undercurrent of despair. Then the ethical life choice, duty, commitment, self-development.
And then the ultimatum comes in and questions the ultimate sufficiency of both.
Exactly. It introduces this religious perspective that casts doubt on whether even the ethical life is the final stage. It leaves the reader with these layered possibilities.
So either or isn't about giving you the answer, but about making you wrestle with these fundamental choices yourself.
Precisely. It explores how you might construct a meaningful existence using this unique literary strategy of pseudonyms to force you, the reader, to engage directly without the author explicitly telling you what to think.
It forces you to confront these either possibilities and see how they play out.
Yeah, there are implications for your own life, your own choices.
Well, this has been a really illuminating deep dive into Kierkegaard's either or. We've looked at that core tension, aesthetic versus ethical.
Presented through those distinct voices, A and Judge Wilhelm.
And we've touched on how the ultimatum complicates things further, bringing in that religious dimension for consideration.
It's definitely a work that makes you think, doesn't it, about the foundations of your own life, really. Which of these possibilities resonates most with your own experiences or what you see in the world?
That really is the question it leaves you with, isn't it? Either or gives you this incredible framework for understanding different ways to approach life, the challenges, the potential in each.
Absolutely. And if this deep dive has sparked your interest, there's so much more to explore in Kierkegaard's work, or in existentialism more broadly. It really opens up a whole universe of thought.
Indeed. Perhaps considering these fundamental either choices gives us all a new perspective on the deep dive of our own lives. Thanks for joining us.